Who were the very first warriors to ever wield the lightsaber? Greetings, acolytes, and welcome back to the archives. The lightsaber has always been known as a Jedi weapon, but what if I were to tell you that they were not the ones who invented it? Back in the days before the Galactic Republic was ever formed, there was the Infinite Empire, a vile system ran by the Rakatan species. The Rakata were some of the first darkside wielders to make a problem of themselves in the galaxy, but it was not they who were the first wielders of the lightsaber, but rather their slaves and servants. These wielders of the Force were known as the Force Hounds. Some time ago we talked about how the very first lightsabers were considered to be a slave weapon. Well, in today's video, we are going to be talking all about those slaves, the Force Hounds, and why they were a major threat to the ancient Jedi. But before we begin, we must inform you of an imbalance we have sensed in the Force. Some of you who are watching have not yet subscribed, so if you want to be notified when we post our daily holocrons, be sure to force crush that subscribe button and become an acolyte today. The Force Hounds play a major part of the growth of the Infinite Empire. The job of a Force Hound was to literally sniff out planets that were rich in the Force, hence their name. Using their senses, they would meditate, finding worlds for their masters to conquer. All of the technology used by the Infinite Empire was literally powered by the dark side. This included the archaic versions of hyperdrives, and they were only ever able to jump to locations that were significantly strong in the Force. By conquering these worlds and planets neighboring them, the Rakata Empire grew, and their massive collection of slaves grew as well. It would be the most gifted and strong of these slaves that they would breed the Force Hounds, and the cycle would continue. Force Hounds were integral to the growth of the Empire, but also to the status of their leaders. To own a Force Hound was extremely prestigious among the Infinite Empire. Rakata that were very powerful would rise up through the ranks, attaining the title of a Predator. It was only the Predators who actually owned Force Hounds. The way Rakatan culture worked, is the Predators were always in competition with one another, and always looking for a way to stab the other in the back and gain more power and prestige. However, their laws prevented one Predator from killing another directly, so they had to do all of their fighting and conflict through way of their Force Hounds. In this way, the Hound serves not only as scouts, but also the protectors and enforcers of the high-ranking Rakata. According to tradition, it was a Force Hound that found a rich world, and by law, the planet belonged to the owner of that Force Hound. The ruthless competition of the Rakata leaked down to the culture of the Force Hounds as well. None of them had real names, but were each just given a designation by a calling number, a letter of the Abresh alphabet. Along with this, they had their letter tattooed somewhere upon their face that was plainly visible to all. The reason was to remind the Hounds that they were always replaceable and slaves, and they either proved to be valuable to their leaders or die. According to Kesh, the marks were also tattooed on their bodies and limbs, doing so that their pieces were easily identifiable in battle. This law of survival was how the Hounds grew up with the Rakatan care. They were grouped together as children and constantly forced to fight for the entertainment of the overlords. Whoever lost these sick matches would be murdered and then eaten. These were to teach the Hounds the law of service to the Infinite Empire, which was, if you cannot fight and you cannot win, then you would better die trying, as surviving a battle is far worse. Living as a Force Hound was a constant struggle, much like the Sith that would come later. Competition and backstabbing was always encouraged. However, no Force Hound was able to fight or kill one another without issuing a formal challenge. This was up to their Predator owner in order to approve these challenges, and they grew up with no empathy, no compassion, and no mercy. All of this was to cull the weak, so that the Force Hounds who made it to the Predator sides were the strongest that the galaxy could offer. In many ways, the training of a Force Hound was far more sick than even that of the Sith. They were taught solely to seek power through fear and pain, and they were profoundly powerful in the dark side. You see, the task of a Force Hound wasn't just to go and find planets for the Empire to conquer, but they themselves were the first wave of the invasion. Acting as single soldier armies, Force Hounds would infiltrate whatever world they scouted for their Predators, and they would soften up the resistance by crushing the strongest foes before the main invasion arrived. This process would work miraculously until the Force Hounds encountered the very young Jedi Order, and both sides finally met their match, At the time, the Jedi may have a much deeper understanding of the Force than the Hounds did, having chosen to seek its mysteries in pursuit of balance. But the Hounds knew the Force in a different way. They allowed themselves to be consumed with what would later be known as the dark side. They lived to fight, kill, survive, repeat. To them, they knew the Force as a weapon, one that hung at their belt the same way that their saber did. The Force was not a sense of comfort to them, but a blunt weapon used to conquer and destroy. Having been bred from powerful Force sensitives, they sifted through hundreds of gladiatorial combat matches to find the perfect Hound, and they sometimes received special training or instruction from their own Predator masters, gifted tacticians in the ways of the dark side. The Hound would grow to be strong and to act on their behalf alone. Because of this, during this era, the Hounds had some of the most advanced techniques and understanding of the dark side in the entire galaxy, far more than the Sith did in this era. They were so skilled that two Hounds by the name of Kesh and Trill were capable of defeating several Jedi at once, even go blade to blade with the Jedi Masters. Kesh, which was the strongest of all the Force Hounds, is one we can look at for the peak of their capability. When he sensed and sought out the world of Tython, the home world of the Jedi, his mere approaching presence threw everything on the world into chaos. Many members of the Jedi Order began having visions and hallucinations of a dark entity approaching, causing them to stumble when practicing, or even become distracted when fighting. One of the Dark Jedi, named Dagon Locke, had a vision long ago about a dark warrior appearing on Tython with a sword made of fire. When Kesh landed on Tython, his aura was so dark that it threw the entire planet into a violent Force storm. His mere signature and presence unbalanced the fragile world, and once he arrived, he would prove just how powerful he was. He took on 3 Jedi journeyers by himself, and nearly defeated all of them, had it not been for one particular warrior, one who disarmed him using his Force Saber against him. For reference, the ancient Jedi Order had a rank in between Padawan that we know of today as Knight. Back then, the Knights were known as Rangers, and this rank was the Journeyer, making this Jedi still somewhat a learner, but one advanced and skilled enough to be on their own, but they still had to adhere to a greater master. It took 3 of these Journeyers, each of them proven to be skilled on their own right, who completely failed to actually put Kesh down. In the battle, Kesh was able to cause an earthquake and a rockfall with telekinesis, and one of the Jedi, who didn't even use a sword because she used the Force as her weapon, caught him in her telekinetic grip. Kesh would overpower her grip and throw her into a wall with his own might in the dark side. To finish it off, he caught a ball of Force lightning with his bare hand, redistributing the lightning back at the group of Journeyers. To put him down required one of the Jedi Masters to get caught up in a Force storm, wielding its power to drop a lightning bolt on top of Kesh from the sky, and even then, he was awake for a few more seconds, refusing to go unconscious. The power of the Hounds were made complete with their weapons, one that became legend, one that would one day become the lightsaber, at the time known as the Force Saber. Still different than a lightsaber or an archaic proto-saber, these precursor weapons were indeed a cylindrical hilt that still produced a blade of energy. However, no ignition switch and no power source besides the crystal were present. The weapon was powered purely through the use of the dark side and fed off of the Force energy that the wielder conducted. Only by giving into rage and hunger for death and battle could one activate the Force Saber. The flame ignited. None of the blades had different colors, all of them being a single violet indigo. Not much reason is given for this other than it being a literal manifestation of the dark side itself. The Jedi were very cautious of this weapon, and when they captured Kesh and put him within a prison on the moon of Bogan, the master of the alchemy forge temple of Tython ran his Force Saber through a series of experiments. He ascertained that the hottest fires of his forge couldn't affect the weapon, nor did submerging it in cold water cool the blade. They found out how to activate the weapon by slightly tipping the internal balance towards the darkness, but this gave them much cause for alarm. However, when it was soon revealed that the Empire were on their way to invade Tython, Kesh's heart was softened and his mind changed, and he would then teach the Ancient Order how to mass produce the Force Saber. using his own saber as a template, with this being the very foundation of the lightsaber of the future. After the fall of the Infinite Empire and the defeat of the Rakata, most of the Force Hounds would die out, and the entire concept was abolished by the galaxy. The only thing that remained of their order was their weapon, one that the Jedi would stop using for a period of time. After the Force Wars with the Infinite Empire concluded, the Jedi would go back to using swords, as the Force Saber were causing massive amounts of them to fall, and the Order would actually use swords for the next couple thousand years, only revisiting the concept of the lightsaber much later. Not wanting to draw upon the dark side to activate their weapon, the Jedi took the concept of a frozen energy blade, but made a makeshift version that included an external power pack connected by a cord. Creating an internal power cell wasn't done until well after the creation of the Sith though, and the process of making the lightsaber that we know today was a long one which took place over the course of thousands of years. But it all came back to this one group of dark side consumed slaves known as the Force Hounds. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the Force Hounds? Did you know about them before this video? In a later video, we'll be discussing something similar to this in the Imperial Knights, so stay tuned for that. As always, my friends, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Hounds in the comments down below, and as always, may the Force be with you.